The fire hose of news from America can feel like a lot these days.
If you're trying to figure out what to make of it all, we got you.
I'm Katie Simpson.
And I'm Paul Hunter. We're correspondents here in Washington,
working just around the corner from where much of the action is taking place.
2 blocks from the White House.
And that's the name of our new podcast.
For top-notch analysis of U.S. politics from a Canadian perspective, find 2 blocks from the White House every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts,
including YouTube.
Grasshopper is a super simple virtual phone system for small businesses. And a 15-second ad, that's all we have room to say. Fortunately, that's all we need to say. Try it free at grasshopper.com.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Canadian Conservatives will be in Calgary this weekend to vote on whether Pierre Poilievre remains leader and shape their party direction. The gathering will take the pulse of the Conservative movement following another failed attempt to unseat the Liberals in a federal election that also saw Poilievre lose his own seat. And it comes just weeks after he couldn't convince at least 2 of his MPs to stay in the party under his leadership. Even if the party faithful support Poilievre's continued leadership, and all indications are they will, another vulnerability is emerging for Conservatives: how to sell the party of Poilievre to the general electorate. I'm Caryn Ceolin, and today on The Big Story, I'm speaking with Jamie Ellerton, political strategist and principal at Conaptus, about how Conservatives are confronting this inflection point and why what happens after their national convention in Calgary will be the bigger test for Poilievre. Jamie, it's so great to be speaking with you today. Thanks so much for making the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Caryn.
If you could look into the future for us, what do you expect to happen over the next few days?
So the Conservatives are meeting in Calgary this weekend. It's the biannual convention. And as a result of the Conservative Party not winning the last election, the Conservative Party's constitution says that the leader has to face a review vote, which is essentially asking party members if they want to review who leads the party. And so I think it's important to understand what's going on here, because obviously a lot of political news, people hear in the polls, and obviously all Canadians get a say in a general election. But for those taking part in this convention, these would be Canadians who are members of the Conservative Party in their electoral district association, wherever they live across the country. And they would have been elected as delegates from their local EDA who are traveling all across the country to Calgary to take part in this convention. And those are the people who will be voting in that leadership review race that everyone keeps hearing about in the news.
And do you expect the party faithful will be likely to support Poilievre's continued leadership?
Yeah, although obviously there was disappointment that Conservatives didn't win the last election amongst Conservative supporters, Pierre Poilievre continues to enjoy very strong support from Conservative Party members and his caucus. And so this will be a formality. He'll get a chance to give a big keynote speech, of course, at the convention. But in terms of the bread and butter Conservative members traveling to Calgary to take part in this, expectations are he will indeed pass both by the constitutional requirement. I think it's 50% plus 1, equally rated, riding across the country, but also I think with an overwhelming number that will make it abundantly clear that Conservative Party members have confidence in his leadership.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that number and whether it truly matters, given that it is expected that he will walk away a leader. When he won the leadership in 2022, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think he clinched victory around 68%. Is that all he needs this time around, or do you think he needs to walk away with a bigger number to retain the confidence of his party?
Yeah, so this is where the politics of this comes into play in terms of what the technical requirement is and what kind of the perception is amongst people. You saw Bonnie Crombie, if we bring things back to Ontario for a second, who indeed won the threshold to stay on, but viewed the number as too low, and she ended up resigning as leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. And so there's been a lot of politics on this. Joe Clark, probably the most famously, as leader of the PC party back in the 80s. And so for Pierre Poilievre, I think you're going to want to probably have to see something in that upper 60s, that number you just talked about, and anything over that just like is icing on the cake for him. This really is a procedural internal Conservative Party thing. And I know he's been working across the country, meeting with electoral district associations and all the delegates to really shore up his vote and do his homework on this. And by all accounts, there is nobody actively organizing against him or his leadership at this time. There's obviously a very fulsome debate over what the future of the Conservative Party is, what it could do better, how it needs to grow its support base from 41% of voters it got in the last election to what it needs to be to win this in the next one. But for this leadership race, I think people are expecting indeed a number that's well north of 65. But his leadership team ultimately is not going to want to put a marker down that then everyone does the over-under on and creates more political headaches for himself.
Do you think an upper 60s number would be a decisive endorsement, though? Because, I mean, in the same Ontario election, you mentioned Mart Stiles, the NDP leader. She garnered 68%, and that was considered lackluster. She had to clean house. Is an upper 60s for Pierre going to be sufficient enough for his members? Or, are we maybe holding Stephen Harper, who got close to 85% in 2005? Is that the litmus test here?
Yes, I that number is going to continue to be debated. I think one of the things that's working in Pierre Poilievre's favor right now is the fact that no one is actively organizing against him to provide an alternative. There is a pretty broad consensus across the various factions and diversity of opinion that makes up the Conservative Party that Pierre Poilievre did historically well. And in any other election, frankly, the Conservative Party would have formed government had it won 41% of the vote. Now, obviously, times are changing. The political map of the country is changing. And if the Conservative Party wants to be successful, it's going to have to do something differently to do that. But broadly speaking, amongst Conservative Party members, Pierre Poilievre will be given the chance to lead the party into the next election. And so this weekend is that kind of first formality of securing that, and really presents an opportunity for him to start 2026 by turning the page and beginning to write his next political chapter.
I certainly take your point that, 41% of the popular vote is impressive. Is that it, though? Is that the pitch? Like, we almost won?
So I think when you listen to what Conservatives have been saying, and recognizing again that he has to pass his leadership review part just to be able to maintain his leader, he's been very much talking about the success and the growth of the party. The numbers that he won the leadership race with back in 2022 were unprecedented, and people saw the rallies that brought new lifeblood in. A lot of people who historically in more recent elections chose not to vote. And they felt that Pierre Poilievre was their champion and that he was providing some hope and some optimism because they do feel left out in Canada today, and that the system's not working for them. And in some ways that the deck is stacked against him. And so there's a real kind of divide in Canada right now as to how people view Pierre Poilievre. I would note that David Coletto at Abacus Research out of Ottawa in the lead up to the convention this weekend has been doing a deep dive in research and kind of where public opinion sets, and recognize that no leader of any political stripe is ever going to have the support of 100% of Canadians. Those who are like the bedrock base of the Conservative Party, and then a second tier of people who are generally Conservative supporters or open to voting Conservative, they really love Pierre, and they really think he is this answer and a genuine alternative. For the rest of the country, it's far more polarizing against him. And so that wherein lies Pierre's biggest challenge of his conundrum. And so when you're looking at the role of the leader of the opposition, as his title suggests, leader of the opposition, it's to oppose the government, hold the government of the day to account. That is how our parliamentary system works. But of course, if he wants to become the next prime minister, he needs to provide an alternative. And so part of the politics for Pierre in the coming weeks and months is, how does he hold his base, people who feel left out and are looking for an alternative, while assuaging some of those doubters over. And I think you started to see perhaps a bit of a new approach coming out of Prime Minister Carney's speech at Davos last week. Although we had a lot of things he was criticizing the Prime Minister on for not moving fast enough, and kind of holding him to account with some critiques, if you will, of what he's doing on the domestic agenda. On the bigger picture, where is Canada's place in the world, what we need to be doing and how to get there, he praised the Prime Minister's speech for recognizing that the world has changed and talking what Canada needs to do to weather the storm we're going in and kind of create that new happier normal so that we can get back to happier times as a country.
Yeah, I do want to ask you about Mr. Poilievre's assessment of Carney's speech in Davos in a moment. I just want to pick up on the public polling. I did read that Abacus data poll. I think it came out just earlier this week. I find the political paradox that the public polling has revealed, like, really fascinating, because national voting intentions have pretty consistently shown that the Conservatives are statistically tied with the Liberals. But then Poilievre's personal numbers, they trail the Prime Minister's by a pretty significant margin. How much is Poilievre's unpopularity with voters outside the Conservative base a factor, if at all, in this leadership test? Is it at all perhaps a liability for the party?
So I think to say it is a liability for the party is almost too much of an absolute statement and doesn't give enough of an airing, if you will, to events that can take place between now and whenever the next election is. The ability of any leader to assemble a team and show that it's not just a one-man show, and to present a genuine alternative. And so that's part of the challenges, is where I think Pierre really lies. And I think part of what Pierre is going to need to do if he's going to ultimately be successful is there are a lot of Canadians who are absolutely fed up with Justin Trudeau and want to change. And amongst Conservatives, that desire for change, as you would expect, was the absolute strongest. But I think where Conservatives are finding themselves getting into trouble right now is they're trying to tie Mark Carney and his version of the Liberal Party and kind of making essentially an implicit argument that all Liberals are the same, nothing really changes with them. And fundamentally, I just think that's not actually aligning with how Canadians experience this government and see the world. And so by not giving credence to just the basic reality that Mark Carney, although some of the policies are the same, he has represented real change for Canadians. And the Liberal Party recreated itself on a dime last year and ended up winning the election. And so when you look at what the challenges are going forward and how Pierre is going to have to kind of carve out some of that support base, one is that it's going to have to bring Liberal numbers down by planting seeds of doubt. You could do that by looking at the domestic agenda and trying to get greater attention of the minds of Canadians onto issues that maybe aren't driving headlines the same way that Donald Trump, Canada, USMCA trade, or CUSMA, depending on the acronym you're using, how that kind of drives the day-to-day. And it's going to be kind of a back burner, slow burn for him, but he needs to continue to remind Canadians that he's presenting an alternative. And so it's not just enough to kind of criticize the government on a daily basis. He needs to be kind of finishing the sentence of, and here's what we'll do in government to make it better. I think part of what you saw in Pierre Poilievre's critique of Prime Minister Carney's speech in Davos last week was, okay, we generally agree with the broad strokes. The world has changed. Canada's not a superpower. We're caught between between a changing world order and some autocratic forces like what you see coming out of China and Russia that are a net negative for the world. How do we go forward with this? And when you listen to the Prime Minister talking about getting more Canadian energy to market, making it easier to trade even just amongst Canadians and having true free trade across the provinces, the Prime Minister has talked a good game and he speaks of what he wants to do. But in the past year, in terms of actually realizing that, the reality is not keeping up with the rhetoric. And so I think that is where Pierre Poilievre needs to say, yes, and here's how we can do it faster, and hold them to account. This kind of notion that Canadians writ large dislike the Liberals as much as Conservatives do, and what might play well online to Conservatives who like get their daily lulls, if you will, looking at tweets and posts on Facebook. It needs to be something more than that that's going to bring people in by adding to the Conservative coalition and not just hoping that the Liberals defeat themselves.
I want to ask you about perhaps the collaborative tone that Mr. Poilievre appears to have struck recently. Of course, as you mentioned, the Prime Minister's speech in Davos, I think it was possibly the first time Mr. Poilievre offered rare praise for the Prime Minister. His party said earlier this week they are willing to work in a bipartisan fashion to fast track legislation. Is this an attempt, do you think, to recast the party more largely as a government in waiting, as opposed to not just a prime minister in waiting?
Yeah, I think that's definitely it. And I think anytime a country or a political constituency is under some kind of threat, people look for leaders to help provide reassurance and put their faith and trust in them to get to the other side, to get to a better place and resolve whatever the challenge is. And obviously, when you look at the challenges Canada is facing today and the rhetoric we see coming out of the White House and the genuine threats to our sovereignty, Canadians are looking for answers and are looking for hope and are looking for a way forward and someone to defend their country. And so the Prime Minister gets the benefit, frankly, of being the incumbent government and getting to be Canada's fighter. If you think like of a 1990s video game like Mortal Kombat, Choose Your Fighter, and you see Donald Trump on the other side, people are choosing Mark Carney. They want to see Mark Carney represent Canada and do so well. And so I think trying to stand out in that environment, frankly, is going to be challenging for any opposition politician. And so part of what the Conservatives are going to be doing coming out of this election, well, yes, they're going to be in the story on the kind of the day-to-day headlines in the big picture, is really focusing on the domestic agenda. How are we fixing the bail system? How are we adjusting criminal justice issues? People are seeing a lot more open-air drug use in their cities and kind of feel like the country's in a state of decline. And so Conservatives are providing a lot more answers and wanted to talk about that and holding the government to account for not following through on it. When you look at affordability and trade agreements, these are all good things in a macroeconomic sense. Like this is something Canada, I think, should be doing. And there's a pretty broad political consensus in Canada to do that. But ask anyone who started a business, just because you want to start a business doesn't mean it's going to be profitable day one. And so when you have new trade agreements and new trade arrangements, it's then going to require Canadian businesses to go to those markets, strike those deals, and effectively set up shop and export those goods or services. And so that's going to take a longer time. And so the bigger picture macro environment that Prime Minister Carney is predominantly focusing most of his energy on right now from a political choice standpoint is not going to yield immediate results into the lives of Canadians that they feel on a day-to-day basis, even see around their communities. And in that lack of that kind of like that stasis, if you will, that people are feeling and that general unease is kind of like where that debate is taking shape.
I imagine, given the context that you've just laid out, Conservatives are in no hurry to rush into the next election.
Yeah, we saw the federal government's budget is now being done in the fall, and that was passed in November. And we saw some parliamentary antics of opposing the government and voting against that budget, but making sure that the government indeed had the numbers to pass so that Canadians weren't thrust into a polls. I don't think Conservatives are looking to go back to the polls anytime soon. I think, frankly, the party needs to regroup. And that is what part of what will take place at Calgary at the convention this week.
I wonder if you've seen, because you've laid out what you'll be watching for in terms of what the party will do going forward and how it should sell the party of Poilievre to the general electorate. And I wonder if you've seen perhaps any other evidence of that strategy currently being employed.
Yes, I think if you look at kind of high level, in the lead up to the last election, Pierre Poilievre effectively shunned mainstream media. He did his daily announcements, but he didn't do a lot of sit-downs, a lot of one-on-ones with kind of traditional mainstream networks. Since the election, he started to do more of that and recognizes that although legacy media and how we consume media is obviously very much changing and continuing to evolve, as communication technology and changes have always evolved over the course of history, he is looking to make himself more accessible and engage in those places where previously, for whatever reason, he chose not to. I think when you look at the bigger caucus was elected in the last election, Conservatives increased their seat count and have a larger opposition. You're starting to see other members serving on the Conservative benches starting to get more profile, sharing some of that spotlight with the leader. And I would expect in the lead up to the next election that the Conservatives would have a more focused effort on candidate recruitment and looking at who potential future cabinet ministers could be. And what, if you look at what, say, the leader's weaknesses are, this is true of any organization, like whether it's anyone working at a restaurant, anyone working for an agency, anyone working for an office job, there's always kind of a hierarchy. And whatever the leader's vision is, and that leader is going to have strengths and weaknesses. And part of your job as a leader, of course, is to build out a team around you to get the job done. And part of that is compensating for perhaps weaknesses that any leader has. And so I think part of what presenting the party as a government in waiting is the challenge that the Conservative Party needs to meet is not just that Pierre is a good attack dog and a good litigator in terms of holding the government to account, but really giving Canadians the confidence that the Conservative Party is ready to govern and has the team to do so. If we know based off public polling that Mark Carney is viewed as a better prime minister and his personal leadership numbers are better than what the party support numbers are, one of the ways to address that is to show more of the team and to show the competence and skill that's there so that people get a better sense as to what they would be buying if they vote Conservative in the next election, as opposed to taking a risk on a leader that they might still have some concerns about.
I just want to bring it back very quickly to the leadership review, because the Ontario PC Party Convention is also happening at the same time as the convention in Calgary. Does this have any factor into what's going to happen in Calgary? Does this hurt Mr. Poilievre at all? What's your take on that?
I don't think it's really going to have an impact on what it means for Pierre Poilievre taking place in Calgary. The Conservative Party of Canada and the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario are two different political parties. And although there's a lot of overlap of people who support one and the other, historically, the people tend to be more engaged in one than they are in the other, just based off their own personal interests and how they choose to take part in our democratic process. So the people, I have no doubt there would be some who would have liked to have done both. But in terms of like the broad strokes, most of the people would not go to all of these things at the same time. And I think, if anything, given the rift that we've seen between Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre over the past few years, that reports show they're trying to mend fences, and the Pierre Poilievre's new campaign manager, Steve Outhouse, widely respected across conservative parties, conservative circles across the country, is making those overtures to start to build those bridges and mend those fences. That'll continue to take place in the background, probably away from media headlines and cameras. But in terms of the impact of what it's going to need at the convention this weekend, it's kind of going to be an anecdote in like paragraph 8 of a 9-paragraph story for anyone reading about the coverage this weekend.
Fair enough. I'm just wondering, just lastly, whether or not, Conservatives or anyone around Poilievre, might be worried at all about what's to come after the convention, because obviously you've laid out the challenges ahead. It appears Poilievre is going to get that second chance. Are the people around him at all concerned about what he might do with it?
I think they most definitely are concerned, because it's frankly their job to be concerned. The circumstances after the 2019 election and the 2021 election are very different. Andrew Scheer resigned as leader after there were growing pressure in the public from a variety of people across the country and across different factions of the Conservative Party, and chose not to fight on. Erin O'Toole stayed on immediately after the election, actually never made it to a convention to face a leadership review vote before the parliamentary caucus voted to oust him as leader, because they no longer had confidence in his ability to lead the party. And that is what paved the way for the 2022 leadership that brought Pierre Poilievre ended up winning. So this is the first one since Stephen Harper's 2004 election loss that goes back to, in terms of a leadership review vote, do you want to stay on? And in the broader scheme of history, a lot of leaders do get two kicks at the can to fight in a general election. I think Pierre is going to be given that chance. And I think part of the politics of what this is going to be internally going forward, aside from that leadership review number, which again, no one's really expecting surprises this weekend, can't count the result until the ballots are cast, obviously. But no one's been actively organized to oust him. And so he will probably get through that this weekend. But on a go-forward basis, every single day he's going to continue to have to prove that he has the confidence of his caucus, and to keep them united and working in the same direction to be growing the Conservative cause in Canada if they want to be successful. I think if you look at anywhere where he continues to stall and things get worse, I feel like look at what did Justin Trudeau, and essentially was ongoing decline in public poll numbers. You can never put too much faith in one particular poll, but if all the polls over the course of 18 months show you going from 40 down to like 18 and about to get wiped out, the Liberals obviously acted, and which is why you saw essentially Justin Trudeau forced to resign. That made the way for Mark Carney. So there will always be politics, but for the purposes of the convention this weekend, I think people expect Pierre Poilievre, and I expect Pierre Poilievre to survive that vote, but don't fool yourselves. He will continue to have to fight and lead. And the reality is being a leader of a political party in 2026 is a 24/7 job. And you've got to be fighting multiple fires while looking to advance your cause every single day. And that's not going to change regardless of the outcome on Saturday.
Jamie, a real pleasure to glean just a little bit of your insight here. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to help share that expertise to help your listeners understand.
And that was The Big Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. You can send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. Reach us on Instagram @frequencypods or on Blue Sky @thebigstory. If you know someone who might enjoy this episode, be sure to send it to them. You can also listen to The Big Story every day on the Seeker app or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Caryn Ceolin. Thanks so much for listening.